as I said, this style of practice is one that I love because it's the same instructions for the formal practice as it is for the informal, for the everything that happens during our day. So it can begin to feel like there's less of a shift between formal practice and what we call informal practice. There can be a difference, and I'll speak more to this later, but I'd say that one of the main differences is in our formal practice. We're often more still or doing less. And so there's more of an opportunity for the mind to let go of content, to let go of stories, to let go of thoughts and ideas, to just notice them as thoughts, to notice them as ideas or beliefs, and not to be engaged with the content. In our daily lives, we need to be engaged with content. And this is one of the beauties of this style of practice, that we can know the content and then know how the content is affecting us, know how it's landing in our bodies, landing in our minds, notice the reaction to it, notice the response, notice how it's filtering into our physical system and our mental system, and to be aware of that. So there's differences in what is noticed. We could say there's differences in the objects of experience, often in our still practice and in our daily life practice, but the instructions are the same. So the basic instructions, before I say the basic instructions that Sayadaw offers, I'll say a few words about kind of the frame or the orientation of practice, because just being mindful, I mean, somebody asked me this question the other day, just being mindful, just being aware, as Sayadaw sometimes says, awareness alone is not enough. And somebody asked me that question to say more about that. What does that mean? Awareness alone is not enough. This apparently appeared in the Daily Tejaniya a few days ago. Some of you, if you get the Daily Tejaniya, you may have noticed this quote. And my understanding of what he means is that mindfulness, in the suttas, at least in the Pali Canon, is really defined as a neutral quality. We could say it's the basic capacity of our minds to know what's happening in the present moment while it's happening. And that's a kind of just the self-reflective capacity of our minds. It's part of what makes us human, this ability to know ourselves in the moment, to have this kind of meta-awareness, we might call it, or kind of the awareness that we're aware. But that awareness can be joined with different motivations. A thief might be very aware as they're moving through a house to steal things, very careful in their movements, and know that they're moving, know what they're doing while they're doing it. But their motivation is not to simply be aware of their movements. It's to be quiet, in order that they're not caught, in order to steal. So the motivations are greed and aversion. It's not to just be interested in, what does it feel like to step? What does it feel like to reach? What does it feel like to be moving through this space? So that motivation for the awareness is not liberating. It's not going to help us to understand our hearts and minds. So there can be a neutral motivation for mindfulness. Athletes, musicians may be extremely present while they're playing their instrument or while they're playing the game. But there's the sense of being in the flow there. But the purpose, again, isn't to understand what it's like. It's to play the game or to play the instrument. So it's more of a neutral. I wouldn't say it's unwholesome, but it's more of a neutral capacity of awareness there. The wise mindfulness, the mindfulness that is liberating, that the Buddha was pointing to, is a kind of awareness that's directed to notice experience in the present moment as experience in the present moment. So we're interested in understanding, what does it mean to be a human being that's experiencing what we're experiencing in the moment, whether that's joy or anger or movement. This kind of interest helps us to see what's going on in our hearts and minds, and will reveal how and why we struggle. This was the real brilliance, I think, of the Buddha in many ways, was that this simple quality, when turned to look at what is the experience of being human, what does it mean to be aware with an in-breath? What does it mean to be aware while stepping, while reaching, while touching? What does it mean to be aware of that as an experience? In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha encourages us to be aware of the body as a body, of feelings as feelings, not feelings in terms of what they're going to do for me or what I need to do about them, but being aware of feelings as feelings, being aware of the body as a body. And another piece of that instruction is to clearly comprehend the experience, where clear comprehension has a definition of knowing thoughts, feelings, and perceptions as they arise, persist, and pass away. So essentially there, I won't unpack that phrase completely in the moment, but that essentially also being aware of the impermanent nature of these happenings. And so these perspectives will help us to understand something about how and why we suffer, how and why we struggle. And we all do. It doesn't have to be major stress and suffering to create the experience of unease, of dissatisfaction. There's all kinds of ways that our minds get involved in how we relate to the experience. And so this practice of noticing what's happening in the present moment while it's happening, from this perspective of interest in experience as a happening, as an experience, helps us to see its conditioned nature, helps us to see its impermanent nature, helps us to understand its unreliable nature. It's not a place that's worth clinging to as something that's going to make me happy, because there's nothing in our experience that is permanent, that will last for very long, that's something that we could hold on to make us happy. And this is our fundamental mistake, is that we do tend to hold on to things thinking they will make us happy. And so this practice begins to help us to see where we are holding on, where we are pushing away, where we are having beliefs about what we need to hold on to or not need to hold on to. And so this practice helps us to see that. And then one of the great things about awareness and wisdom coming together, this perspective of looking at experience from this way, essentially brings a wisdom perspective to awareness, is that with this kind of awareness, when we notice reactivity, when we notice some kind of clinging or aversion or beliefs going on in the mind that are creating stress and suffering, when we notice those with this kind of awareness, oh, this too is a happening. This reactivity is just something that's arising in the mind. When we notice that, it tends to create the conditions for it to weaken, because we see and feel our system, let's say, our system recognizes that it's painful. It feels the suffering of it. And so our system, one of the great things about the way our system is built is it doesn't want to experience that. We don't want to experience it either. Our conscious sense of self doesn't want to experience it either, but our system wants to move towards well-being. We don't have to try to move towards well-being. Our system will, through this kind of mindful, wise mindfulness, will move in the direction of letting go of things that create stress and suffering when they're seen in this way. When anger arising is seen as anger arising, the system feels the suffering of that and begins to release it. Now, this is not a fast process, I would say. It's a process that takes time, but it definitely heads in that direction. And I can say this from my own experience over the last however many years it is, almost 28 or so years of my practice. The movement to release the reactivity has been the one of the main benefits that I've experienced from the practice. And so that's one of the sides of the practice, is that noticing the reactivity, noticing the greed, the aversion, the delusion, when we see that with mindfulness, it tends to weaken over time. And on the flip side, when we notice wholesome qualities, when we notice compassion and love and patience and wisdom, when we notice the qualities that are not based in greed, aversion, and delusion, this kind of mindful awareness strengthens them. Because again, we notice, we feel the well-being connected with those. When we feel love, we feel the well-being. When we feel compassion, compassion has an interesting flavor to it. It does feel like something's quivery or shaky or something, because we're experiencing the suffering of someone else. We're resonating with it. There's an empathetic resonance with the suffering of someone else, with compassion. But at the same time, there's a feeling of rightness to it. There's a feeling of, yeah, it's an interesting flavor. I wouldn't exactly call it well-being, but it feels good to feel the suffering of others and not deny it. And that movement also then has this inclination to act to alleviate that suffering. So there's the benefits, or the purpose of our practice is really based in all of this, to move our hearts and minds in the direction to let go of greed, aversion, and delusion. And that very letting go creates room for these more wholesome qualities to become more available. And then the noticing of those wholesome qualities strengthens them. These wholesome qualities also have an active component to them. So compassion wants to act to alleviate suffering. Wisdom wants to understand the suffering. Love wants to connect us with others. This is their nature. This is how they function in our hearts and minds. And so this releasing of greed, aversion, and delusion creates the conditions for more of these wholesome qualities to motivate our movement through the world, which our world needs right now. So I'm inspired to be here with all of you who are interested in cultivating more of this, especially in your daily lives, to bring more of those wholesome qualities into the world, to your own hearts and minds. But, I think we know that greed and anger and aversion are contagious. We feel how, when someone is angry with us, or when we read or see something on the news where there's anger being shown, the anger arises in us. It's contagious. And just also, likewise, compassion and love and wisdom are contagious. I think they're often overwhelmed by greed, aversion, and delusion in the world, but they are quiet but powerful forces for good in the world. So the style of practice, I would say all forms of our practice, all forms of Buddhist practice work to cultivate the wholesome and let go of the unwholesome. And we could just say there are different ways, different forms of practice, different styles, different technical methodologies for cultivating the mindfulness for settling into concentration, different practice methodologies. And so this one that I'm teaching for this retreat is just one of those methodologies. So it's different than many that people tend to learn here in the West in particular. We tend to there seems to be more of a culture, let's say, in the West around mindfulness, is starting with, cultivating mindfulness by attending to some simple particular object, especially like the breath or something like that, directing the attention to be present and to know that we're present. In this style of practice, we don't direct the attention to anything in particular. It's primarily a receptive practice, a receptive attention. We simply settle back and receive what is happening, what's happening in the present moment. This can take a shift, and this is partly why I'll speak a bit today. This shift from directing the attention to not directing the attention can take some time to kind of understand and to trust. It can take some time to trust that it is going to work, that the mind isn't just going to be carried away. And so we need to learn how to receive without being in the way of that receiving. One of the things I'd say in this receptive style of practice that's particularly notable is that what we really start to see as we settle back and just notice what's happening is we see the habits of our mind. We see what our minds tend to get up to. And often it's habits based in greed, aversion, and delusion. This isn't a mistake when we see this. This is actually part of how this practice works. And it again, this also can take some adjustment, because we often feel like, well, if I'm starting meditation, the mind's supposed to settle down before I start noticing what's going on in it. And in this practice, we just start with what's happening. And we cultivate the recognition that we know it's happening while it's happening. And we cultivate looking at what our relationship is to that is happening. So those are some of the kind of basics, and I'll unpack that a little bit more. But I just wanted to say that if you're noticing in this style of practice that you're seeing habits of mind, that you're tend to be seeing a lot of reactivity, this isn't a mistake. This is part of how the practice works. And then we'll talk about how to work with that. The basic instruction is see if you can just be aware of it. Notice the relationship to it, but we'll go into more instructions about that. So in this style of practice, we are from the beginning opening to all aspects of our experience, our physical experience, our mental experience, the sensations of body, of hearing, of sight, taste and smell, if those are happening, as well as everything that's going on in our mind, the thoughts, the emotions. Emotions are understood to be a mental process in the Buddhist psychology. So emotions, thoughts, feelings, also we open to being aware of that. And then there's the encouragement to not only notice what is happening, but to check how we are in relationship to it. And this is a lot of where the seeing of how our minds get involved and create suffering starts to be seen. We see that something's going on, and often our relationship to it is kind of behind the scenes. We're not so clear that this thing is happening and we don't like it. We may know somewhere that we don't like it, but we're not aware, oh, this is happening and not liking is happening. We're not seeing the relationship as happening, as something that's arising. And so this is a crucial part of this practice, to begin to recognize how our beliefs, our views, our perspectives on our experience are shaping our experience. And then again, when we can see that, oh, this is happening and I don't like it. When that can be seen, that may be able to then be seen with some, oh, it's okay that this is happening. We've got that perspective of curiosity about these as happenings, as experiences arising. That creates the conditions for the learning to happen around the conditioned nature of it, the impermanent nature of it, and for the wise mindfulness to begin to let go of those habits and patterns, to cultivate the more balanced perspective of mind. So in the first few days of the retreat, I'd say that establishing mindfulness is what's most important. Not so much what we are aware of, but just noticing that we are aware. This is like one of the first shifts, I think, in this style of practice. We can, like right now, can you know that you're aware? And if you're hearing my voice, you're seeing the screen, you know the body's sensations, you know what's happening. You are aware. If you're not lost in thought and thinking about things, not aware that I'm even saying things, which you won't know, you are aware. Now, you may not know how you know you're aware. That's okay. That becomes more clear over time. But one of the first things that Sayadaw points to is just checking in. Are you aware? That question, or that kind of curiosity, am I aware? As I said, if you're even asking that question with some measure of clarity, it's not just a rote kind of thing going on in your mind. Again, you are aware. So it's useful to check into that, because it begins over time checking into that. At first, when we know that we're aware, we mostly know what we are aware of. And we know that we're aware because we know there's something we're aware of. We know there's seeing happening, so we know we're aware. We know there's hearing happening, so we know we're aware. But we're more aware of the seeing and the hearing than we are of the awareness. This is more where we begin. And so, that's fine. You can know, I'm aware. I know that I'm seeing, so I know I'm aware. Just kind of take in the fact that you know you're aware, and then acknowledge whatever is obvious. This is the next piece. So we know that we're aware, and then we know what we are aware of. So what is obvious is the next piece. Just noticing what's obvious. And that's going to be one of thousands of things happening in the present moment. It may be a broad sense of just being in the room, knowing that you're sitting here. It may be more precise, a sensation in the body, or a experience of a thought, something specific. So we know we know that we're aware, and we know what we're aware of. So those two are kind of some of the building blocks of this practice. The first question of, am I aware? It's useful to check into that, because over time with this practice, with that kind of curiosity, am I aware? What is it to be aware? It begins to help us to distinguish the difference between the object, the sight, the sound, and the awareness of that experience. So we begin to notice the difference between them. And the establishing of the awareness is crucial in this practice, because in many forms of meditation practice, we establish the awareness by staying with an object. We stay with the breath, for instance. And so we know that we're aware, we're cultivating the continuity of awareness by staying with one particular experience for a period of time. And so the mindfulness is strengthening in that way. It's getting stronger. There's a continuity of mindfulness that's established by staying with one object in these other forms of practice. In this style of practice, the continuity of mindfulness is established by being aware with changing objects. So this is concentration. The continuity of mindfulness is what concentration is. We tend to think of it as stability with one object, but the concentration of a stable mindfulness can also mean knowing changing experience. There's a sight and we know it. There's a sound and we know it. There's a body sensation and we know it. There's a mental experience, an emotion, and we know it. So that is also a continuity of mindfulness. And so the experience can feel kind of a little bit jumpy, maybe, it feels like the attention shifting. It's a lot of different experiences. And over time, we begin to understand what the stability is, the stability of the awareness itself, the stability of awareness moment after moment, the quality of that. There's a feeling of stability that can come with recognizing that the awareness is stable, even though the objects are not stable. And by stable, I don't mean like it's I guess by stable, I mean that awareness, mindfulness is happening moment after moment after moment. And that mindfulness will be meeting a different experience, a different experience, a different experience. The concentration, concentration can be defined too as the absence of the hindrances. The hindrances are not arising. And so with that continuity of mindfulness moment after moment, we begin to be able to be stable with knowing, oh, this is what's happening. Oh, there's a sight, there's a sound, there's a body sensation. And there's not a leaping off of that to react to it with a kind of a proliferation of mind. So the mindfulness stays stable without leaping away from it. So we're not getting lost. So there's that stability of awareness without losing the awareness through reactivity or just drifting, just drifting out of awareness. So this is too where the checking the attitude comes in, checking the relationship to the experience comes in. So as we notice, we're aware and what we're aware of, especially as we begin this practice, as I said, we see our habits of mind. This is not a mistake. We will see our reactivity. We will see that the mind does react to what is happening. We don't try to stop that, but what we try to do is to notice it. So we notice a body sensation. We notice a painful pressure in our hips, for instance. And then we see the kind of tensing that happens around that, the clenching in the mind. If we're not noticing that, then the clenching begins to take over, and then we begin to worry. We begin to think, oh, what do I need to do about this? And should I move? Or so the not seeing of that energy of the aversion begins to take over and take us away from the mindfulness. And so the practice is to, as we're noticing our experience, to also notice, how am I in relationship with that? Oh, there's not liking happening. There's a fear happening. And then to also be aware of that. Now, the being aware of our attitudes, our relationship to experience, I would say it's not something you have to do every single moment. The basic instruction, am I aware? What am I aware of? Those are the basic, checking in. How am I with experience? What is the experience? Am I aware and what is the experience? When we start to notice there's a feeling of challenge, feels hard to meditate, feels like the mind is getting tight or leaning towards or pulling away or just some kind of like turning in the mind, that's a good time to check the attitude. What's the relationship to the experience? There's going to be some basic flavors of relationship to experience, 3 that I've talked about a lot here in this few minutes. A flavor of greed, of wanting something, of wanting to hold on to it, to lean into it. A flavor of aversion, of not wanting it, not liking it, wanting to get away from it. A flavor of delusion, which can be a sense of disconnection or just almost like a hazy, foggy kind of relationship. But I'd say the more insidious kind of version of delusion is that we have some kind of view or idea about what's happening that is so habitual that we don't see it's a view. We don't see it's a belief. So just an example, one that I'm sure many of you have noticed, is when sleepiness is happening when you're meditating. You might have the belief, I can't be sleepy while I can't meditate while I'm sleepy. So I have to change my experience. I need to open my eyes. I need to get up and walk around. I need to do something because I can't meditate while I'm sleepy. I have to change this experience in order to meditate. That's a belief. That's an idea that's not actually true. That can be hard to believe, but it is true. I can tell you from my own experience. You can be aware while falling asleep. You can be aware while sleepy. You can be aware while falling asleep. You can be aware all the way into falling asleep. It's quite amazing what we can actually be aware of. So it is just a belief. But when we don't see it as a belief, it's going to motivate our action. It's going to change our experience. So the experience of believing I can't be mindful while sleepy tends to create the sleepiness as being an unpleasant experience because of that belief. Because that belief produces a kind of aversion. But the belief is underlying that aversion. So that's delusion. Beliefs that we don't know are beliefs. And what I'd point to is when you notice some kind of belief, you don't have to try to change the belief. So for instance, if you have that belief, I can't be sleepy while meditating, or I can't be meditating while I'm sleepy. I can't be aware while I'm sleepy. If you have that belief, if you see that belief, and I propose that if you even recognize that you're having that thought, you are aware of the thought. You are aware of the belief. And so notice that. Oh, believing I can't meditate while sleepy is what's arising right now. You can know that. That's being aware of that view, of that idea, of that belief. Then you might notice that, perhaps you believe that belief. This is another piece around looking at beliefs. You can see how strongly you believe the belief. Yes, I'm on board with that one. I have to do something. I have to fix this. I have to change it. That's a strong belief. You don't have to convert the belief into non-belief, but you do have to notice. In this practice, we need to notice that we are believing something. So I've covered the basic pieces of this practice, recognizing that we're aware, recognizing what's obvious, checking the relationship to the experience. Again, these are the basics, it's like, it's not very much to do. In fact, very little doing in this practice. One thing that supports this non-doing perspective, or just getting out of the way and just being able to know I'm aware and what's obvious, is relaxation. So relaxation is something that Sayadaw speaks about a lot. Sayadaw U Tejaniya speaks about a lot. Relaxing the body, relaxing the mind. And that's when we do a guided meditation, I'll start there because it's so supportive. Starting with relaxation creates the conditions. When we relax the body, it creates the conditions for the mind to be able to be a little more relaxed. And when we relax the mind, quite naturally, it is aware. When the mind is not involved in doing so much, what it does is awareness. So that relaxation creates the conditions for awareness to naturally be more available. So we'll start there as we do the guided meditation, and I'll emphasize this a lot over the week. So there's the relaxation, the noticing awareness, noticing what's obvious and checking the attitude from time to time. The last piece I want to talk about is how we make effort in this practice. This is a place, I think, where a lot of suffering happens in meditation. For many of us, especially in Western culture, we tend to over effort. Many of us tend to over effort. We tend to hold on to the object. We try to stay present with something by gripping onto experience. And this creates a lot of stress and tension in the meditation. And so coming back to relaxation also helps how we can make effort in this practice, which is just with a really light touch, a light touch of effort. It's just right now, how can you notice the sensations of your hands? How about a breath? How about seeing if you got your eyes open? You know that. When I name each of these things, it's usually not so hard to know them. It can be just like, again, if you're listening to what I'm saying, when I said, can you notice your hands? Likely it was like, yeah, there they are. It didn't take a lot of effort. It wasn't like I had to grab the mind and drag it to the hands. It was just, there they are. A breath. There it is. So this light touch of effort is what we aim for. Just enough effort to be present with what's here in this moment. Just enough. And then you do it again. And then do it again. What's obvious right now? A breath, a body sensation, a sound, a breath, a mood, a happiness. Just light touch moment after moment. And again, the moment after moment piece is often, again, where we tend to try to hold on. We sit down at the beginning of a period of meditation or some time that we're going to practice mindfulness, and we think, I need to be present the whole time. And it's like we try to pick up the entire 45 minutes in the first second to try to bring the effort to be present for the whole 45 minutes right in the first moment. And that's going to create tension and stress. So all we need is enough to be present for this moment. And then we do it again. And then we do it again. It's a light touch, moment after moment after moment. And I'll say more about that as we go. So I've been speaking for about, 25 minutes about the instructions or so. And just want to give a few moments for Dawn, if you want to add anything from your perspective of things that are useful in this practice, there's a lot more to say. I know there's a lot more to say, and we will unpack this over the days. But just Dawn, if there's anything you want to add in terms of things that you found useful for just getting settled.
You've covered a lot of territory. There's a lot more to cover. I think the only thing I would add at this point is there's an incredible value I've found for me personally in also keeping open to noticing the more wholesome attitudes of mind as well. So I was noticing appreciation as Andrea was talking, for example, or noticing interest in kind of a joyful way. And those two can be resources if you're not in a hurry to get anywhere. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that in, Dawn. As I was mentioning the kinds of attitudes, I forgot to mention the fourth, the fourth kind of attitude, which is wise attitude, wholesome attitude. That attitude of, and this will happen sometimes. That when we notice what's happening, it might be like, well, I don't notice an attitude. When we think of attitudes as only being greed, aversion, and delusion, we might miss that we're having an attitude of connection, of care, of patience, of compassion, of balance of mind, of ease. And so those are really important to notice, as Dawn points to. It's really important to recognize those, because when we notice our mind is okay with what's happening while it's happening, there are wholesome qualities in there, and the recognition of them strengthens them. So thank you for that, Dawn. So let's take a 10-minute break, come back at, I have 7:58 this time. So let's come back at 8 minutes after the hour. So 10 minutes from now. And yeah, remember to turn your cameras off.